I went to the most artistic city in the UK to meet Cara Jane Hayman. Many of you might remember Cara from her time working at Decoman, who were the European distributors for Kato polyclay. Through that role of giving presentations and demonstrations about this polymer clay, Cara met Donna Kato, and the two went on to become lifelong friends. Together, they traveled extensively teaching classes, exhibiting, promoting polymer clay, and appearing on Jewelry Maker TV. If you've been around the polymer clay world for a while, there's a good chance you've seen Cara in action. But more recently, Cara has completely immersed herself in bringing movement into polymer clay. Her work has surprised the automata world, where moving sculptures are usually carved from wood, and at the same time she's challenged polymer clay artists by showing new things that our beloved material can do. In short, she's shaken up both worlds, and I cannot wait for Cara to be teaching her brilliant flapping parrot workshop at Clayphoria. What makes this even more fascinating is Cara's background. Cara holds a degree in materials science and engineering, and for many years she worked for the Defense Evaluation Research Agency. She focused on researching the properties of advanced composite materials, including carbon fiber, reinforced panels, much of it involving large mechanical testing machines and destructive strength testing. So today, we're diving into Cara's journey from scientist to polymer clay artist, from testing materials to making them move, and getting to know the person behind the work a whole lot better.
Most people I have spoken to have found polymer clay in their adult years. However, Cara here have discovered polymer clay at the age of 7. And whilst most people fall out of love with the hobbies that they had as children, Cara is still using polymer clay. So tell us more about your journey with this medium.
Okay, so I come from a very creative family, and as children we were encouraged to do lots and lots of crafts. We did everything. And I loved my Cindy dolls, and I always wanted all the cool accessories, but we had lots of toys, but we weren't like spoiled rotten. We didn't have, like, and I wanted all the cool stuff for my Cindy, but I wasn't necessarily given it, so I decided to make it. So I used to sew her little outfits and make her cardboard houses, and then I wanted to make her some food. And so my mum got some polymer clay and we made some little sandwiches, and then I made her a tea set. So I was 7 years old and playing with my dolls, and she used to have very tiny little teacups. And I used to love playing with it. And so I used it in that way for quite a few years. And then I probably forgot about it for a few years. And then I remember very clearly when I was about 15 and I wanted to be really sort of hippie, and I wanted to have all these beaded necklaces, and I decided to make some beads. So that was when I made my first cane when I was about 15. I made a flower cane, and I actually made a cane with a black flower and a white background, and then one with a white flower and a black background, and I made chains and chains and chains of beads of lots of tiny slices. So I did a bit of that sort of through my teens, and then again I dropped it for a few years, and then one of my niece's birthday was coming up, and I thought, I want to make her something, and I'll make her some earrings. And so it was just sort of the first days of the internet then, and so I just sort of typed into search engine, it was before Google, I typed into a search engine polymer clay earrings, and I couldn't believe what I saw, because prior to that I'd only seen what I'd made, or maybe somebody at a craft fair had made something sort of similar to me, and I might have had one little Fimo leaflet or something, but my ideas for making with polymer clay were sort of, they were sort of limited to sort of normal expectations. And then when I typed it in and I saw some stuff by Donna Kato, and I was just like, I couldn't believe my eyes. It's like, I have to learn to make this. And so that was the start of my journey. That was probably maybe 15 years ago or so. And it's like, okay, I want to make things that look like that. And so I started, there was lots of blogs at the time, so I was on everyone's blogs and looking at tutorials. I don't think YouTube really existed at the time either, and I started sort of trying to find out more and teach myself and learn some more, so I just carried on.
Well, you actually have a blog yourself as well.
Yes, I do.
Tell us more about that.
So I started blogging. So my sort of career history, I trained as a scientist. I've always done a lot of arts and crafts in my spare time. It's what I enjoy doing. But I did a degree in science and engineering, and I worked as a research scientist. And so then when I started trying to learn how to do polymer clay and like make really beautiful things, but part of that was about making things that were were really sort of professional and really durable, and so I wanted to know more about the properties, and actually some of my scientific research was about polymer materials, so it was kind of quite related. And so when I was at work, I had all these really expensive machines and test machines and computers and data loggers, and I wanted to be able to do some of that at home. So I sort of found some ways. My husband's a scientist too, so we sort of brainstormed some ways we could test without access to this equipment. So my blog, I did quite a lot of stuff about curing and about how the temperature you cure at changes the strength and the flexibility of the clay. In fact, recently I just did the first blog post in several years about ovens, because I'd got the data from a long time ago and I'd just never got around to writing it up. An oven doesn't just go, 150 degrees, I use Kato, 150 degrees, doesn't just go 150 degrees like this. It cycles through, so it gets 150 degrees, it gets a little bit too hot, the thermostat tells it to turn it off. It cools down, it goes a little bit too cool. And so I've done a blog post sort of explaining how the oven works and what to look for to make sure your oven is performing well.
I'm going to link Cara's blog down in the comments so you can go and read about it. And you can really tell that Cara is a scientist because of her approach to writing that blog. She explains absolutely everything. There are multiple graphs and you can see it for yourself. She even recommends the best oven you can buy for yourself. You just mentioned Kato, so most people who are in the polymer clay community do have their favorite brand of polymer clay. However, it's a common practice to mix all the clays together regardless of the brand, apart from Kato. So how is it that you picked Kato, one of the odd ones out there, as your favorite polymer clay?
So, 15 years ago, when I decided I was serious about polymer clay and I was going to learn to be an expert polymer clay person, I was using Fimo Soft because that's what I could buy in my local shop. I could buy Fimo Soft, and I was making canes, and it's completely possible to make beautiful canes from Fimo Soft. There are many artists who make really beautiful canes from Fimo Soft. I was having a bit of trouble with mine sort of distorting. And then at the time, again, I was reading blogs, and all the Americans, most of the blogs were coming out of America, and all the Americans were using Primo. And I thought, I've got to try Primo. And I had to send for it online because none of my local stores had it. And when I went online to look for it, I found, there's a few other brands as well. So I ordered a black and a white, or a blue and a white, I can't remember, of every brand. And I tested them, and I made exactly the same cane. I did exactly the same things with each one's, to see how they were. And actually there's a blog post about that too, brand comparison. And the minute I made a cane with Kato and I sliced it, I knew that Kato was for me. And I could just see, I made the same cane, like a sort of simple well, at the time I probably thought it was quite complicated, but a simple geometric cane from two colours. I made it in Fimo, in Primo and in Kato. And I cut into it, and the Fimo squashed, the Primo squashed, and the Kato just stayed the same. And because it's so much firmer, it really keeps very crisp, sharp details. And I say it is completely possible to make beautiful canes with other clays. For me, I'm quite heavy-handed, and I just like, Kato's very firm, and it means I can be heavy-handed with it and not distort it. I just find I get a much better result. And often when people sort of say, I can't do canes, they just end up all mush. Often I think having a firmer clay helps because the colours stay more separate and you get less distortion. It is harder to handle, and if you've got weaker hands, probably Kato is not going to be your friend. But yeah, if you're having trouble caning, try a firmer clay and see if it helps, or leach the clay you've got. If I'm working with a different brand, which I do sometimes do, I very much prefer Kato. I sometimes use a bit of Cernit. I often leach it so that it's a bit firmer, so it has a bit more resistance for me to work with.
Even with Kato, you would leach?
Kato, I don't leach Kato, no.
Yeah.
Very occasionally white. Sometimes the white is softer. No, I don't leach Kato.
I also think that one of the reasons why most polymer clay artists don't go for Kato is the limited colors, because they only do primary colors and metallics. But also the translucent has been introduced to a Kato range.
No, there's always been a translucent. It's not the most translucent. That would probably be the one time when I would actively reach for a different brand. If I wanted to do something very translucent, I probably... It's not bad. It's not a bad translucent, but there are more translucent clays. I personally really like the limited palette. It's much cheaper. I buy the primary colours, and I don't need to have 500 different colours, but also my jewellery is my jewellery, and it's not, you don't look at it and go, oh, it's peacock pearl, oh, it's Caribbean blue. It's my blue that I've made. It's unique. It makes my jewellery more interesting, I think. And actually, if you're conditioning your clay, and Kato does need a bit more conditioning than some of the other brands, but that conditioning time is your colour mixing time as well. So it doesn't really take much more time, and I can have any colour. I can have any colour I like. And to start with, I wasn't very good at mixing colours, and I really struggled, and I had to do a bit of sort of learning and again experimenting. There's that brilliant book, the
I know the book you mean.
Maggie and Lindley's book, working through some of those exercises really helped me to understand colour. And now I know if I want to make a colour a bit more muted, I add a bit of the opposite colour. Or I've learned to mix, and I keep a record of all the colours I've mixed, which means if I make a cane and I want to make it again, I can look back to my colour chips and go, oh, okay, I need 2 blue and 1 green, and then I've got this beautiful teal.
Okay, perfect. So you've made yourself a cheat sheet from all the experimenting you've done.
Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. Obviously, with being a scientist, you have a very methodical approach to creating art. So how do you actually get in a mindset of creating something new?
It sounds like I'm methodical. If you ever came to see my studio space, you would understand that actually I work in chaos. I work in chaos. Yeah, so there's 2 different sides. So I think the testing, the sort of colour mixing and the oven testing, that's a different side of me, a different part of my personality.
A different side of your brain, right?
A different side of my brain, yeah. And so the creating, often I sit down to make one thing and something else arrives. And I used to find it frustrating, but now actually I realise often it's the best way. So in fact, this is a prime example, this little puffin here. I was making a soon-to-be-revealed Easter automata, and then I suddenly went, oh, actually, that would work as a brooch. And then before I knew it, I've now developed a whole range of puffin brooches. Those of you who don't know me, I'm slightly puffin obsessed. So yeah, I kind of sat down to make an automata, but before I knew it, I've made a brooch. And actually I've got this as a moving brooch, but I've made ones that aren't moving. And it just, before I know it, I'm off over here. And sometimes I think it's not a conscious decision. It's my hands are doing the making and the material sometimes leads me.
That's a brilliant way to describe it, because actually making art is more about relaxing. You know, it doesn't always have to be very technical. You can just play around and enjoy yourself, because essentially that's your time off work.
Yeah.
So recently you've been making everything that moves and is articulated. So explain how these work.
Okay, so I started polymer clay making, miniatures, and then I moved on to jewellery, and then I moved on to sculpture, and then I've always been fascinated by automata. I used to go, there's a place called Cabaret Mechanical Theatre that used to be in Covent Garden, and I used to pass through London a lot, and I always used to call in because I just loved watching them. And then it suddenly realised that actually I could do that. And so I've been on a couple of courses. I'm currently doing a course with puppets in Prague to make automata, and they are all wood-based. And when I sort of asked about joining the course, they said, well, you know, come along and have a look and see, because we will be doing wood skills. And I said, it's okay, I'll be able to do it with polymer, don't worry. And because polymer clay is so adaptable, you can do anything with it, right? So I started making these little, this guy's, he's been in a box. He's a little bit unhappy about being in a box. Maybe we'll get Margita to take a little video of him closer up so you can see him better. But he's a puffin and he's flapping. I'm finding one of the beauties of polymer clay is that there's no limits. You can do anything with it. So I started off making jewellery. I'm not constrained to making jewellery. And same if I start off making jewellery, I started off making jewellery with canes, but I don't just have to use canes. I can use surface techniques, or I can use mica shift or silk screens, and I do that a little bit, but mainly I love making canes. But actually I'm really enjoying the sculpture, and so here's my little town crier cat who rings a bell. He's got the little rats or mice underneath. And I just, the challenge for the sort of homework for my course was to make something that made sound, and I was thinking, okay, I want to use a bell. What would ring a bell? A town crier. I don't want to sculpt a face. I'm not very good at sculpting faces. And then I thought, oh, I could do a cat. So he became a cat. But I love learning, and there's a lot of learning going on at the moment because the sculpture side of things is new. I've done the sort of cane, like my cane-covered puffins, which is fairly simple sculpture. Whereas doing this cat, I had to do the features and the clothes and thinking about the armature for the art. There's a lot more. So I've been learning a lot about sculpture, and I've been learning about the mechanisms, and I've actually been doing some woodwork too. So my husband helps me a bit, but actually, you know, I've now had full garage training, and I can use the saw and I can use the drill, and so it's been fun.
Look at that. Polymer clay is actually teaching you a lot more technical life skills.
Yeah, it's true. I was just thinking actually, like, you know, actually now I've learnt to use the tools, actually I could do more. Oh no, don't listen to this, husband. I could do more around the house. No, it's right, he won't see this, it's fine.
So what about things like cutters? Do you use them in your artwork?
A little bit. I have some. I probably have more. The same at silk screens and cutters. There are definitely two hobbies. There's buying tools and there's using tools. They're two different hobbies, and I enjoy the buying tools hobby as much as everyone else. So I have quite a lot of cutters. I very rarely use them. I occasionally use them for a pendant. So this pendant is a circle cutter. More often than not, so the puffins, I've made myself a cardboard template that I cut round, and then if you're cutting freehand, each one is a little bit different, which I think is nicer. So yeah, I occasionally use them as a tool. Silk screens, I've got probably 40 silk screens. How many pieces of jewellery of mine have you seen with silk screen work on? Maybe 2?
Yeah, now that I actually think about your prior work, it's mainly cane work, isn't it?
Yeah.
From the one brooch that looks kind of like wood flooring.
Oh yeah, well that's cane too.
Oh, is it?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Well, actually, let's talk about that a bit further. So your jewelry is exceptional. It's very smooth. It's very well finished. So you used to teach workshops, right?
Yeah.
So is it something that you'll be doing in the future as well?
Well, actually, funnily enough, I'm teaching in the Netherlands, the marquetry, the faux marquetry. I'm teaching that in the Netherlands this September. So I've had a break from teaching. Pre-COVID, I used to teach a lot and I used to travel a lot, and I really enjoyed that. And the world's a slightly different place and my time's slightly different. And for a while I was the president of the British Polymer Clay Guild, which took a lot of my time, and that meant that I didn't have time or energy or headspace for teaching. And now I'm no longer the president of the British Polymer Clay Guild. Thank you, Helen Cruikshank has taken over. And I've got a little bit more headspace, and I'm not quite sure whether I want to launch back into doing lots more teaching, because I'm really enjoying just experimenting and playing and having some time for me. I haven't had time for me to play for quite a long time with organising events and teaching and work and family. So who knows? Maybe.
But yeah, Netherlands. Yeah?
Yeah, Netherlands in September.
Brilliant. And speaking of teaching, actually, Cara used to organize this event called Polymania. Polymania took place in Bristol, and I had the opportunity to attend the event in 2019. It was a brilliant event. It was 4 days, 3 teachers were there, international teachers, and they were teaching their workshops. It also provided an opportunity for polymer clay makers to meet in one hotel and hang out and just chat all day long, clay all day long. It was absolutely brilliant. But then 2021 event was the last Polymania event that ever happened. And I remember that being a particularly challenging time, because the event was supposed to happen in Bristol, just like it usually happened. But then COVID started, and because of the pandemic, lockdown was announced. So then you had to change your event very quickly from having it been an in-person workshop to then suddenly being online. I still don't really understand how you achieved it in such a short time frame. But given that you did, and it was a huge success, do you have plans to bring that event back now that you're no longer working as a guild president?
At this point, no plans. I ran Polymania, I think we did 7 Polymanias, did we? Maybe not that many, I don't know. We had quite a few Polymanias. And the in-person ones were wonderful, and actually that was where we first met. And it was just really great all being together and being in the Polymer bubble and being able to, we part of my thing with the hotel was we have to have access to the room after dinner. We have to be able to be up all night claying because somebody always wants to be. And so we used to go and have dinner and then get back to the room and just sit and chat and drink wine and play with clay. And they were really brilliant events, and I met a lot of lovely people and I had a really lovely time. Tutors were all amazing and it was really nice to hang out and get to know them. And I really enjoyed it, but it was an awful lot of work to organise Polymania because I'm quite control freak, maybe, attention to detail, and it meant that the end result was a really nice event, but an awful lot of work went.
Just to say here, if Cara does something, she gives herself all to the project. She's not gonna do like a half job, she's gonna do it properly. So which is probably why you're so exhausted after such a big project, because Cara did it single-handedly.
Slightly because I'm a control freak. Plenty of people did offer to help, but it's one of those, like, I know how to do it. If I just do it myself, it's almost quicker than to tell someone else or have the worry that someone else doesn't do it the way you want it done. So yeah, I did it single-handedly, and with that meant that it was about 6 months work to plan, prepare, to do the bookings, to do all the liaisons, to get all the clay, to sort the hotel. There was an awful lot of things to do, and I really enjoyed it, but it was quite a lot of stress and a lot of work. And then there was actually one more online Polymania. So we had the pandemic year where it was the most stressful time of my life. Donna and I had just come back. We were teaching in Gothenburg, and we flew back from Gothenburg, and the plane was empty, and it was surreal. We're at the airport, Heathrow Airport, like, where is everyone? And we just got back to my house, and then we were uncertain about whether or not the event could go ahead because of all the news reports, and we were sort of hoping we were going to go ahead right to the last minute, and then we couldn't. And there was a lot of financial risk as well, so it was really, really stressful. And we managed to pull it off by going on to Facebook Live. We didn't know about Zoom then, because Zoom,
it wasn't mainstream.
It wasn't something. It was something that people who did online conferences did, and so we did it on Facebook Live, which kind of worked. Other than we couldn't chat back to the tutor, so we lost that companionship that we have from being in the actual event. And then we did one more the year after where we did it online, and we did that through Zoom, and that was much better because we could chat, and we had sort of breakout rooms so we could chat a bit, and that worked much better. But by then I was guild president, and I worked part-time, and my day job was getting more busy, and it all just felt a bit too much. So at the moment it still feels like a bit too much. The sort of financial gain is insignificant really compared to the number of hours. And whilst I really enjoyed it at the time, at this point in my life, I'm not saying never, I'm not saying no, but not this year, probably not next year, and let's watch this space. Maybe.
For those of you who don't know what British Polymer Clay Guild, it is a non-profit organisation based here in the UK, and it's aimed at popularising polymer clay as an art medium and supporting the artists who are using the medium. What is your favourite piece that you have ever made from polymer clay?
Tricky question. So probably I've got several favourites. So the jewellery that I'm wearing I love because it's got all my colours in, and so it goes with a lot of my wardrobe, and I wear it a lot. And I find organic difficult. I like geometry and I like symmetry, and so actually this cane is asymmetric, and that was quite challenging for me to build something asymmetric. I'll let you get a close-up of it in a bit. So I enjoyed the challenge of it, and I'm really pleased with how it looked, and just everything worked about it. And it's one of those, I had a plan for it, and it didn't. If you saw my drawing of the plan and this, you'd go, okay, I can see where you're coming from, but the colours changed, the pattern changed, but it all just came together. And sometimes it all changes and it's like, okay, that didn't work, but this all just came together. So I really love that.
I was like inspired by the original sketch.
The original sketch was the starting point, and then as you start building the cane, you go, okay, that's a bit complicated trying to do that. Actually, why don't I do it like this? Or I ran out of green. Okay, well, why don't I throw some grey in? Or it sort of evolves as it's going.
And it's actually quite funny that you say that you can't work in abstract, because I find that abstract is something that everyone can do, because you get happy accidents and you don't have to be very precise if you're just creating, and then you might end up creating something unintentionally pretty. Whereas you don't think about it that way, do you? You always create with intention.
Mainly, yeah. When I very first started, I used to love like the Natasha beads.
Yes.
And just because you never know what you're going to get, and you cut it open, it's like, oh no, not this one. Oh wow, that's amazing! And just I really loved the sort of randomness of that. But when someone says, oh, just do something a bit organic, that's really not my comfort zone. And a lot of my friends, polymer clay friends who work there, a lot of their work is very organic, and they love a bit of paint. And no, give me a cane. I know where I am. I can, I can constrain a cane. I can make it do what I want. Paint, I'm not so comfortable with. One of my other favourite pieces is a marquetry brooch I made, which is a heart. I'm not a heart person. Like, hearts aren't something, I don't doodle hearts. Hearts aren't a theme that I have. But I was making these split pebble brooches, which I was really enjoying. And then it was kind of coming up to Valentine's Day, and I thought, well, maybe I should try making a heart. And it just something about how it all came together just really worked. And it's so beautifully smooth, and I take quite a lot of pride in my finishing, and I spend far too long sanding and polishing. But when I'm doing it, I'm like, oh, like, what am I doing? But when I've done it, I mean, even this puffin, he's been sanded, he's got a beautiful finish. He just feels so nice. It looks much more professional. It really elevates my work. And actually I find, if I'm at I don't do many craft fairs. I tend to take part in arts trails in Bristol. Bristol's a very artistic city, and there are maybe 7 or 8 different arts trails that take place around the city, and they're intended for artists in that area, but where you've got connections, people tend to move across. So I always take part in Totterdown Arts Trail with a very good friend of mine at her house. And there'll be other people on the trail maybe who've got polymer clay jewellery, and people will say, oh, what's this material? And you'll say, oh, it's polymer clay. And they're like, oh, this isn't polymer clay. It feels like ceramic, or it feels... So I think actually you can elevate just by attention to detail and sort of that level of finish, and it can really elevate. And I know I've had people say, oh, I have real trouble charging a lot of money for my work because people say it's just plastic. Nobody has ever said to me, oh, your work is just plastic. No, that's never, everyone just like, wow, that's amazing what you've done. So I think just that putting a bit of care and attention, and making really complicated canes or really complicated automata definitely help. People aren't thinking about the material, they're just looking at the art.
Yeah, I guess it is so confusing and hard to figure out what the material is that you're using, just because when you're touching it, it's so smooth and you can't even feel the seams. Like, for example, where the white meets the black color, you can't even feel that change with your fingers when you touch it. And that's the level of professional finish that Cara was referring to. So do you have any great sanding tips? What do you actually do when you sand?
I used to sand like really crazy sanding all the way up to really high. I used to go through like 10 different grades of sandpaper and micromesh finishing cloths. I used to really, like, when I started, the sort of pinnacle was like a glass-like sheen, like it looks like you've got resin on it. And I used to spend hours doing that. And actually now I really love this kind of soft matte finish or soft satin finish, I guess. And I try and do as much as I can before I cure it. So I use baking parchment often, and just sort of smooth it with my fingers if it's a flat piece. Make it as even as I can before I start. When I take my puffin sculptures, which are really sculpted, I mean, they're not huge, they're sort of, my biggest puffin's sort of this sort of size, and the canes are applied, that is not smooth it's uneven and bumpy, and so that will need some aggressive sanding. But I try to avoid aggressive sandpapers where I can, because they leave scratches. So I try and make it smooth as I can, and if it's fairly smooth, I'll start with 400 grit sandpaper, wet and dry, and and I will get the surface how I want it at 400 grit, and then I use 600 grit sandpaper, and then I buff it, sometimes with a linen tea towel, sometimes on my jeans. If I wanted it more shiny, I might use like a rotary buffer. I've got a Fordham buffer. If I wanted it really shiny, I might, and actually from a 600 grit sandpaper with an electric buffer, you would get not a glass-like shine, but you would get some shine. And then my more sculptural pieces that are more uneven, I would probably start with a sort of maybe 180, 240 grit and do quite a lot of work to refine the shape to make it sort of really smooth and streamlined. And then I have to do quite a lot of work getting those scratches I've put in out.
For example, your bear sculpture that was covered in canes.
Yeah.
When you mean that you would start with 180?
Yes, so yeah, and I've got a puffin that's all covered in canes as well.
I remember that puffin actually, I think.
That's one of my other favourite pieces, partly because it's a puffin.
Oh,
And
of course. And your favourite colour is teal?
My favourite colour is teal. Yes, someone said, you always look so coordinated. It's easy, just always wear teal.
And how did you develop your artistic style?
So for a long time, one of my big things was that I didn't feel like I had a voice. I didn't feel like I was an artist. I don't have any formal art qualifications. I went down the science route at school. I've been doing art since I was tiny. And I kind of felt like I didn't have a voice and I was just making stuff. And for a long time, that was, I want to find my voice, I want to find my voice. And actually, by the time I realised I had a voice, I'd had it quite some time. And actually, I think it's about putting some time in and experimenting and playing and trying different things. I mean, when I started, I was using tutorials. There wasn't many tutorials. I mean, like now there's so many tutorials, but there were tutorials on people's blogs, or you could buy PDF tutorials from people. And so I started, my first canes I made when I sort of came back when I was sort of in my 20s, sort of first canes that I were making were flower canes, and I bought tutorials and I was just like, oh, I made that cane and it's so beautiful. But if I just always made the things from the tutorials, my work is always going to be like somebody else's. And so it wasn't, to start with, I wasn't trying to be my own person. I was just making things that I liked and I was happy with it. And then as time went on, I started, well, what would happen if I did this? And oh, okay, so I've got this bit from here and this bit from here, and what happens if I put them together? And so by sort of playing and experimenting, I kind of started to build things that were my own. And actually, a lot of my voice is teal and canes and mainly symmetry. But people to say, oh, I recognise that was yours, and other people could see it before I could see it. So I was really worried about having an artistic voice. And actually, when I was just copying everyone else, no, I didn't have an artistic voice then, because I was learning. That was part of my process for learning, and we all, you learn by imitating, and then you innovate. And so to start with, I was copying, and I didn't have a voice. And then as I started making things myself and taking what I'd learned and putting it together in different ways, that was when I started to develop my own style. And I recognise I love canes. It's still magic to me that you can take some colours of clay and put them together and squish them about a bit, and then like magically you've got this wonderful pattern and lots of it, and you can make it small as well. So this cane, when it started, it's this sort of size. It probably started at this sort of size. It wasn't intended to be that big. I've tried sort of calculating, I want this much cane and I'm going to make it this size. It never works. But it started off about this size, and it wasn't very thick, which means it's hard to reduce. And then, so it meant that I had lots of it, but I've got it in different sizes. So actually these earrings are the same size, but I've made some little earrings and like some tiny stud earrings, and just there you go, miniaturized. It's like a magic machine reducing a cane.
How did you learn reducing canes? Because that's one aspect of cane making that is really intimidating me, because I feel like you end up losing so much of the cane on either side, and also if you're not very careful, you might end up twisting the cane itself through reducing process, and in that case you'll just end up wasting so much clay. So how do you avoid that from happening?
So I learnt to reduce canes from Donna Cato's Millefiori book. And so she reduces on the end and then stretches out the middle to meet. And I do it in stages. So if I had a cane this big, I would bring it down a little bit and then make it all even, and then bring it down a little bit and make it more even. It's hard to describe it in words. It would be a lot easier to show you. And I think one of my advice for, often I talk with parents about sort of getting kids started, and actually if you're making canes with blue and yellow, if it doesn't work, you've got green. Whereas if you make canes with blue and yellow and red and it doesn't work, you've got brown. So limiting to 2 primary colours or to 1 colour and white, you can play about with canes, and then at least if it doesn't work, you've got some nice coloured scrap instead of mud brown. I think using a firmer clay for me definitely helps because you get less distortion. In terms of how you don't twist it, I sometimes put a registration mark. So if I had a cane, I might put just the blunt side of my blade down the back, which gives me a line so that I can make sure that I keep it straight. What other tips do I have for reducing canes? I'm sure people who've been to workshops with me, I'm sure could say, Cara, you normally say.
It's okay, I'm putting you on a spot.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it's partly experience. And there is also a thing about the clays all being the same consistency. So if one of the clays is really soft, as you start to reduce it, it'll bulge out of the end, which means that you'll get more waste at some point. I know a lot of people talk about cane caps and putting on the end. I just find they get in the way.
Yeah, I never really understood them. But I guess reducing canes, it's more about the feeling, right? You need to understand the process, and then you just get this feeling while you reduce it, right? It's hard to explain.
Yeah, I think. But I don't worry about waste at the end too much. I mean, I get waste at the end of a cane. I could put a cane cap on, and that might mean I get less waste, but actually I don't enjoy them. I find they get in the way. I just reduce down. I know I'm going to get waste at the end, and as long as I've got enough cane to do what I want to do, that's not a problem. I always have uses for scrap clay. I mean, for a while I didn't. I used to gift it to a friend, and she's rather sad she doesn't get it anymore. Because now I'm doing sculpture, I use it for the inside. I don't really make beads. I haven't enjoyed beads for a long time. When I started, I used to enjoy making beads and making chains. I don't enjoy jewellery making. I want to make canes. So I make a pendant and I put it on a Boona cord, and then I don't have to fuss with all that beads. So I don't use scrap clay inside beads. So for a long time, if I'd used colours that would mix to a nice colour, I'd have some nice muted blue to use another time. If I had a cane that had lots of colour in and it was kind of a muddy colour, I would pass it on to a friend. I don't need it. And that partly because I use Kato, because I don't need to do a backing, or because Kato's so strong, I can take a very thin cane slice and put a very thin slice of black on the back, and it's perfectly strong and durable. So I don't need scrap clay to kind of fill in there, because I want it to look really neat on the back as well.
Actually, that really reminded me of the experiment that you did a very long time ago, where you actually put a piece of clay on your table and you put weighted
a milk bottle full of water.
Yeah.
This specimen's been baked for 10 minutes at 140 degrees C, taken out to cool at room temperature. In previous tests, one's baked for 10 minutes at 150 degrees C, broke, just like that.
So was that testing durability of Kato clay?
I did it for different brands as well, yeah. So that was around curing. So I did it first on my own, and then Maggie Maggio came to stay once, and she was passing in Bristol, and we're like, hey, let's do some experimenting together. So I used to have, when I was working as a scientist, we used to have this really, really massive, big, expensive machine that basically did that. It took a sample of material and bent it to destruction. And I used to have all these little gauges that you'd put on, and you could measure exactly all the stress and strain. Can't do that at home. So I used, I made like a little support. I put a rod of clay, it was on here. I put a ribbon with a milk bottle and I poured water in it until it broke. So you could see how much strength the clay could take. And sometimes if it's brittle, it just snaps. And sometimes it would bend so much that it would just slip through the supports.
Oh, wow.
So then it's going to be a good, I mean, something like cos clay, which didn't exist back in those days, that would just bend. So it wouldn't hold much strength, but it wouldn't break. And so they have different purposes. And actually what I like about Kato is that it's rigid when it's finished, which means I can make a complicated shaped pendant and it will stay that shape, whereas with some of the other brands they're less rigid, which means that Cato's very strong, which means it's not likely to break because it's so strong. Some of the other brands are more flexible, which means they're not so likely to break because they're flexible. I wouldn't choose to make a bangle that went over your arm. Actually using something more flexible is better. So Cato in that instance is a bit limiting because you can't sort of squash it so much. Whereas if you did it with Primo or Cernit, it would squash. And so it would be more comfortable to wear, be easier to get on because you could kind of squash it to an oval and get it on a bit. But I like the rigidity of Cato. It means I can make big, long, straight earrings that will hold their shape. I like a sort of slightly curved shape, and that means that I know it will stay like that. So yeah, and you know, I'm the UK brand ambassador for Cato Polyclay. If you haven't picked up on that already, I'm quite passionate. I love Cato Polyclay.
And if you would like to see more of Cara's work?
So I've got a website which isn't always very up to date. There's nothing about the automata on there yet, but there will be very soon. Possibly by the time this video is live, they might be there. So I've got a website with some free tutorials and a few gallery posts. There's a lot more on my social media. So I'm on Instagram and Facebook. I'm Cara Jane UK, I think. We'll check that and Margita will put the link. So yeah, I'm not very regular at posting, but I do tend to share on Instagram and Facebook.
Because it's quality over quantity.
Yes, thank you.
That's it.
Thanks for watching.